Everyone doing? You guys hear me and everything? All right, good. I'm pretty sure Jarvis wants questions asked in the Discord, but if you want to put them in the actual meeting chat too, that's fine. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. I figured we could start with SPY first, just to get the overall market sentiment going. Plus, for me, it's kind of good to look at the overall with this first before diving into the actual stocks individually. So, for those of you that don't know, my like specific charting style, I like to look at the larger frames first, like the daily and the weekly, and then work my way down to the smaller frames. So what I usually look for is just the main trends, main zones from supply and demand, and try and find patterns within. So when I first look at the actual chart here for the SPY, you notice how we held this support trend on this rising wedge currently. We actually bounced pretty good about 2 days ago. So when I'm looking at this, I notice how SPY is currently just like in the open zone. And if we're looking for, like for me, I like to wait for zones to hit and not just like play the momentum and just hope it continues. We can see a few tap out points on SPY here. And I look for like a ratio zone, not just like a specific like dead on point. Like for this area, it's like around 408.35. I'm more so looking at just the zone overall. So I'm looking for SPY to push up. You can always get calls and hope this continuation goes. But from my personal opinion with how I do things, I like to look for areas where a pullback can hit. So when I'm looking at this, around this area right here, historically SPY held pretty well if it pulls back, and that's around the 404.20 area. If we come back a little bit more, we can actually see a few more zones that held relatively in that area. If you look, I'll change some of these colors around. So this yellow area, we had two tap outs, basically a double top right here. So I'm looking at the historical points. So this app is Webull. When I trade, I do all my charting on Webull, since for me personally, the mobile app for Webull is pretty good with charts when I'm like not at my setup in my office area. And then my trading I usually do on IBRK and then Webull and TOS, just whichever account I want to trade on the day. So with me, just looking at SPY overall, I don't want to get into too much detail with everything since we all are on an hourly time with this, and I want to go through as much as possible with individual stocks as well. For me personally, with a call position on SPY, I want to see a pullback to at least this first area here, going back historically where it did hold when we had a major red day. And we did drop in after hours and then pre-market to the run up when the day started for, it looks like a 2-day run up, basically back to that extremely heavy resistance zone on that top area right here. So for me, like I know Powell talks, I want to say Tuesday and Wednesday. Yeah, let's make some money. I know he talks Tuesday and Wednesday, and after this huge run up, me personally, I don't want to assume it's just going to continue, and I don't want to chase the call. So I always wait for a pullback, even if it's just a slight one that holds on any of the support zones that I do draw. So like if you want a rough estimate of like what I'm personally going to be looking for, we have a 404.10 area for the first support that I like. It did have, obviously I'm going to mark this again. I'm going to take this one off just so it's out of the way. He's recording. We had this first drop in this area here. And then not even about a week later, we had a pullback midday and it bounced, but obviously it had a gap down overnight. So I want to see a pullback there if we do gap up with futures overnight into Monday. And if that level does break on the downside, we're looking where it held. Obviously the stock was pushing, so this would be resistance on this specific zone right here. But it'll pull back to this support area. This is like a major hot spot for me for calls if it pulls back heavy enough. And if we go back historically, there may even be the two zones back here that we saw previously. So we have the double top right here. which was about within a week span. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 7 days trading days. So there isn't a historical area with that. And if I go to the daily, let's see if there's anything else that may be around there. There's not too much. It's mostly just this rising wedge has been forming. I mean, we're holding inside the zone. The overall is looking bullish, obviously, with Powell and just holding the support from the last 2 days of the market. Me personally, I don't want to look at puts right now because we all know Powell likes to pump the market, whether the rates or the data that he releases are good or bad, or just his projections with inflation. So I don't want to risk really anything. I always want to wait for a pullback for calls, and I also want to wait for a push to a resistance zone to try and grab puts. I'm not a big chaser for me, but if that's your kind of style, you can always go with the trends and just hope that the continuation happens. So I'm gonna jump in the meta now, since a few people didn't mention that. So they had their earnings and obviously the huge gap up into this little cup and handle where it did hold support pretty well. And I'll just for right now, like I said earlier, I look at zones and not like a specific like dead on price per share point for like a bounce. So if we're looking in this area, we had a lot of rejections here historically with resistance. And then when it did break up, it came back down within that zone, almost within a 3 to 4 day period of trading. So now that we're above that zone, we're holding this support. It looks like Meta could complete this gap fill for this cup and handle, which would basically put it up to about 190 to 195 a share. Currently, it's about 185. And just like I was talking about with SPY, I'm not big on chasing. If that's your kind of thing, you can do it. But I like to try and play as safe as possible and preserve my money and not just try and make money off a hypothetical hope play. So if you're looking at a relative smart pullback to not like risk a lot, we had a lot of rejections here before this actually broke on the upside. We had a point here, almost 2 days back to back of a double top high right here on the 4-hour. And then of course, when it finally did break earlier before that, there wasn't enough buying power to actually push it up and like form this cup like it did on Friday, where it actually broke out, almost had a gap up overnight. I mean, it ran almost 10 points in a day, which is massive for a stock like this, especially on a Friday if you're playing 0 DTE. So now that we're back above, it's trying to fill this cup and handle. There's going to be a lot of resistance, a lot of selling pressure if it does complete this push on Monday or Tuesday or any time. So for me, if I want to get calls, I look for a pullback, and that support would be around the 177.90 area price per share. If you want to play with like a first area, you can use the bull flag that happened before it broke down right here. So when I had that push from earnings, it formed a bull flag for about 5 to 6 trading days before it broke with selling pressure. And of course, it held where the previous resistance was, like I put up back here. So when it pulled back, 4-hour. When it did pull back on the 4-hour, it held with a lot of buying pressure in those areas. So you know that as of now, it's going to hold. It's definitely going to hold. There's buying. Not many people are selling. Obviously, after Friday, you can basically see that just off the chart in the ticks. So if you want to have, I mean, my main 2 levels, if I was watching Meta, I'd be focused on where the bull flag was holding support until it broke through. Now that's back above that. It's around the 182.70 area. And like I said earlier, and I'm going to repeat this a lot, I'm not big on specific price points. I'm big on like between 182 and 183 a share for sizing in. So that's one piece I'd be looking at for the first pullback to get calls. And if that support does break, I would focus on that. It's the 177 to 178 area zone. There's a lot of hesitation and consolidation in this area right here where this yellow highlight is. So it could be very choppy if it does pull back, and it may not have enough buying pressure to really make it jump back up. So I would not want to rush the gun on that just to be safe. I know a lot of people, they like to see a push before grabbing calls, and that's perfectly fine. If that's your type of style, just make sure you size light enough where your risk is minimized and you're not going to waste more money if it does consolidate without a push. You just don't want to risk anything in this kind of market right now with Powell talking this week. I saw someone mention Amazon, so I'll go to that real quick. And just like I was talking about earlier, and I'll go back through on the smaller time frames as well. I just like to start with the larger just to show you like the overall perspective of it. Because that's one of the main things I like to look at, just see like what the overall sentiment is on the larger frames. So Amazon right now on the daily, it's in this falling wedge pattern. It's holding. Obviously, if we get a gap fill for the upside with the resistance falling trend, we basically fill if we push up to about $103 a share, 104 a share, but that would take days, if not weeks. So we're in this zone on the daily. This is when I take it down to the 4 hour and the 2 hour just to see what I can form out of this. So if we're going off the 2 hour, switch over. I like to look at these trends. So a lot of people, they just take the top points. So they would do something like this, like the top here, and then where it's at currently. I try and avoid putting trend lines at the current price point, only because if you use where the trend was actually touching the most, we have multiple touches here with this, and every time it broke out, which it broke out here, broke right back inside. Currently, it broke out on Friday. So that's the question right now for me when I look at this. Is it going to have that pullback inside this trend? Is it going to break the trend on the downside? Or could it just contest the trend and then form some buying pressure to bounce back up and have that run up on the upside? When looking at levels for Amazon, yeah, I'll do Tesla next. I got you, man. When I'm looking at Amazon, obviously pre-market the day before, that's basically where it closed at. So for me, I'm not going to want to get calls in this area because historically, which I get, it was only 2 trading days ago, so a Wednesday compared to the close on Friday, I don't want to just buy calls and hope that it pushes with buying pressure. I want to wait for at least something to show me there's going to be strength in there. There's going to be some type of like risk reward where I'm safe enough to load the way I do and not just hope that it continues on the upside. So if I'm looking for a dip to try and buy, for me personally, to get a call position, we have a nice zone right here. Let me delete this other line. I'll make this one red. So we had a lot of support here. Buyers, buyers, buyers. We had a wick out below, but that's just like the market makers trying to get those stop losses hit. Like if you're in calls and it wicks down that far in a day, right here, it's going to be very difficult to hold if you're sized heavy enough, because with that quick drop, they're going to push it right back up because they know people are going to freak out if they're oversized. They're going to have those stop losses set if they're already in profits. They're going to have that 20% stop loss set. There's a lot of stuff that you've got to watch out for, and you don't want to like anticipate the push, because if it does reject, you're going to be scared out to sell. Over 96.3. Yeah. So that'd be the previous higher low, well, lower high on this falling trend right here in this area. That's a good eye right there. That's one thing I'd look for. Like, say I get calls here and it pushes up to this area right here, I would want to trim here. Or like you said, if it breaks above, that's when you could buy calls, because at that point, with these previous higher lows, lower high stuff, so you got the lower high there, lower high here. Now that we're in this area trying to make a higher low, well, a higher high, if we push up to this area and consolidate, we could push back down, which currently we're at resistance. But if we break above, this support zone would be a nice buy area for calls if you want to wait for a push and a pullback. That's just how I trade. I wait for zones to fill. I wait for a support to hold. I wait for resistance to break and pull back. Zoom out here in Jan 2. Yeah, I see. Okay, I see what you mean. This is the one you're talking about? No, that's December. Okay, you just mean the consolidation. The reject in this area right here. Oh yeah, what's up, Mayhem? But yeah, Amazon, this is one of my favorite stocks to trade. It was my favorite before the split. It's been pretty difficult with the prices and the slow moves now. But it's always been zoning. Like there's always a zone with Amazon. When it had this huge run up, I played majority of it, but didn't catch the whole move. And if the market stays bullish, there is a chance that this could easily catch that run up. And I'm not saying like, oh, buy calls and just hold. But if it gets that push, it could fill this gap on the daily where it has these falling resistance trends. It could easily push up and catch that if it has that momentum and buying pressure. Obviously, SPY would have to be green. Overall market would have to push, since Amazon's one of the top indexes, or one of the top stocks in the index for the SPY and the S&P. So for me, once again, like I've said with everything, it's going to get annoying. I like to get calls on the pullback. I'd be looking at the 93.40 area if we pull back $1, which it is possible, but you don't want to just hope it happens and wait. If it breaks above, like the guy said, the 96.90 area, that would be a good spot to look for possible breakout to get calls to let the buying pressure carry it. Or like how I was saying earlier, let that 96.90, 96.40 area reject and let it pull back down to where it's currently at, because that will now be the new support. So it's always best to stay safe, because if it does pull back to this area, like say it pushes, freelance draw line. Say it pushes up and it comes back down to this red highlight. It's currently making a higher low. If it does this, it's going to hold here, push back up. It's going to start that uptrend, that rising wedge. It could fill the gap. You never know. You just have to look at the overall market sentiment. That's one thing that I'm always focused on. I'm always watching the SPY when I'm watching major stocks like Amazon, Apple, Tesla, Nvidia, anything that has a lot of pressure that follows the S&P. I'm going to switch over to Tesla now. So Tesla, for me, this is more so me just venting right now. Very liquid, a lot of volume. It's very hectic. It moves quick. That's one thing you have to be careful with, because if you're chasing a play and just a slight pullback on Tesla, your premiums are going to get like destroyed. Not bad, but enough to the point where you're questioning, should I keep holding this? So when we're looking at this, I'm going to switch to the 4 hour because the dailies, it's mostly just this area right here we're focused on. I do want to say that this does look like a head and shoulder to me. We got the shoulders, we got the obviously the support here on the bottom. So we're looking, can we hold? If you want to take it just to this point right here, we could be in a bull flag. So we're holding this consolidation point of a zone with support and resistance. Tesla's been zoning for basically the past, well, basically almost all of February. It's just been up, down, up, down. The overall market, I know people have mentioned this, there could be a chance, like if Powell has bad news, Tesla could just tank, totally have a bloodfest if this happens. But if the market's like very green, maybe Elon comes out with news about some like vehicles with them or just anything to like push it. If this breaks out with how much consolidation there's been, this will have a massive move either way. There's no like saying what Tesla's going to do, because so much can happen Tuesday and Wednesday. We have to stay open-minded. We have to be patient. If you want to chase it, you can. But like I've said before, I'm not the type to buy calls at the top hoping for a breakout. I'm always looking at, okay, if Tesla pulls back to this area where we've had tons of buying pressure, every time it comes down in just this area, like yes, it's failed before in the past, but just the previous month, there's always buying pressure. So your risk reward, if you get calls on the bottom with say a week or two of time, you can afford to hold these and see if that pressure, because if you're watching the volume and it's still high with buyers over sellers, that pullback buy is going to be massive. And if we have good news from Powell or just overall market sentiment, Tesla breaks 217.90 area at this high, it 220, 230. I mean, there's no telling. The next like heavy resistance is going to be around that 233 area. So you're looking at almost a $10 move just from this resistance break from the past month, the next zone gap up. There's always that massive question though, like when do I sell? When do I want to trim? If you're sized one contract for Tesla, since it is kind of expensive, but if you play like obviously 20, 30 slots out from the option with the current price, you can afford to buy a few and just trim as you go up. But if you only have one contract, I would not recommend holding this multi-day unless you have that much conviction. There's a lot going on with this right now. And like I said earlier, the volume is going to tell the truth with this. I mean, Tesla's always high in volume. It's been trading outrageous. And once this zone breaks up or down, I could see a lot of consolidation forming before it does have that break. But once it does, it could just be continuation until that gap fill. Because with support, we're mostly looking at, so this zone is not specific. I should probably take this away. So this support zone right here, if we break where this highlight is, it's around the 180 area. And the reason I put that there is just because when we had this massive, almost a month straight of just up, up, up with Tesla, we hit that first rejection resistance. Like we had one before down here, it only dropped about what, not even $7, $8. Well, it was almost a $10 drop, but it only took one day, and then the next day consolidation pushed it right back up past the previous resistance that hit. Same thing happened this time. Had one massive red day. The very next day, it was basically back up to where it started, and it broke out. The question you got to watch is, say this highlight breaks and it pulls down, you could look at calls for this like support. You never know. There's a lot of pressure here. I mean, the whole idea of Tesla right now, it's one massive zone in this head and shoulder, just one massive one. So it's all about pinpointing it. You can chase it for calls. If you want to try and get put to the top and hope it rejects, you can. I would more so focus on calls for this for a pullback. That's one thing that I try and do with the overall market. SPY is looking bullish right now. Powell's going to be talking. We know what he does historically. Like, we know that he, whether it's good news or bad, it seems like the market has that push somehow. So for me, I want to see some pullbacks and try and catch some calls. And Tesla could be a good place since we have two zones. So I'll give like a rough price per share of like the two zones I have. Market ignoring data. I definitely agree. But the question is like, what could Powell say Tuesday and Wednesday? The past run up, I mean, we had the PPI and the CPI this past, and like the housing index, nothing was really crazy enough to push us like what happened. So I'm kind of like, it's a toss up what's going to happen Tuesday and Wednesday. I personally think that even if the data is neutral or even slightly bad, we could have that pullback only because we've ran for no reason right now. That's just my personal opinion. I don't want to say I'm bullish. I don't want to say I'm bearish, but just going off the sentiment, we did have a massive push the last two market days. So is that going to continue? I feel it's logical we have a pullback regardless of what happens Tuesday and Wednesday, but that's just how I feel. So the first level for support for Tesla that I roughly have is around that 190 area. So about 180, 187 to 190 is about like the zone for my first support. And if that breaks on the downside, it's mostly around that 178 to 180. Then obviously, if you want to, the next support below that, the zone is practically roughly 170 to 172, 170 to 173, around that area. Tesla, I've not traded in a while, and I don't want to say too much without knowing how it's been moving, but I can just tell there's a lot of consolidation with the volume it's had. There hasn't been enough buying or selling to make it go one way specifically. Let me go to DraftKings right now. So DraftKings, for anyone that has not traded it, this is one that a buddy of mine actually has been messing with for a while. And he's been very heavy on the idea of continuation with it when it has a green day. And I recommended it to a guy in the chat. I like DraftKings because the price of the contracts are cheap. And when you get the move, like even $1 move on DraftKings in a day is pretty massive. But when that happens, your contracts can, I mean, they can, for how cheap they are, the move can be a good return for a low risk if you have a bigger account. And that's why I like sizing a few contracts in this. So I'm going to start with the 4 hour on this. And the first one I put, it can honestly be anywhere in this zone since we had a few wick ups, but I'm going to keep it around here just because of this, that area here. Obviously we had a wick above, but that categorized for 1, 2 days here. And then recently we had about a triple bottom, well, a double bottom with a previous rejection that pulled back. And that's around the almost $17.98. So basically $18 a share for this one. And I'm going to go to the daily real quick just to pull up this resistance on the upside. So we have a triple top, which I personally think is going to be the gap fill if it continues this green day, because it had 2 back-to-back pushes already, Thursday and Friday. So I'm looking at this. This is my, like, this is, what's the right word? Like my opinion of the gap is filled. If it hits like the 120, the $21 a share area, 21 to 21.30, that's what I want to see fill if it can go up. Obviously, we had a reject here, along with historically, there was a few wicks that failed. But using this, just from my experience when I've used this in the past and traded it, I try and size my contracts usually $1 or $2 out of the, well, yeah, out of the money for calls, because when it has a green day, it's not every time, but the continuation on DraftKings is pretty heavy, whether it's upside or downside after it holds the zone. So when I'm looking at this, that 21.30, a share, that's the main spot I want to see fill if I want to before I even think about puts. I mean, if it just zones in this area for the next week, I'm not even going to touch it. I mean, I already missed the pullback for the calls when it bounced off there. Let me switch to the 2 hour. So I missed the calls in this area already. That would have been like the best entry possible. Because if you size, let's just say a contract or two, DraftKings is cheap enough that if it does fail, you can hold through a few wicks on the downside before it pushes back up if it does. And now that it's actually held and shown strength 2 days back to back, it's at this resistance zone. If it can push above this, it could hit that gap fill to contest where that triple top was that I showed you on the 4 hour. Or was it the daily? Yeah, the daily. DraftKings is always one of the stocks I watch every day just because of the moves it has. And just even if the market's red, DraftKings is one of those stocks where if it has the buying pressure, sellers are not going to be enough to make this drop. It's just one of those things. I've seen SPY be red and DraftKings can be up 8 to 9% in the day. So that's why I try and keep this on rotation along with all the other stocks I have on the side over here. I try and keep one stock from each sector so that I can just see what the overall market's doing. Because if, say, oil and gas is down, so XOM's red, but say healthcare is green on the day, I'd be looking at other stocks besides energy and gas since I don't want to mess with that kind of stuff. I want to find like what's hot on the day with the sectors and then find the stock with the most volume in that sector to try and trade with the options. So I'm going to go down the DraftKings on the smaller frames now. So at this point, we could obviously reject and pull back to the support that was at the about $18 a share area. But if you want to try and catch like a smaller move on it, you can always look at where it held in the intraday here. I mean, this was obviously pre-market, so I try to include pre-market with like a zone. But when it correlates with stuff like this midday drop, held and pushed, and then obviously the same thing happened in this area. And then Friday opened when it had the pullback from the gap up, it held that support and push. So if it does pull back to that 1850 a share, 1860 a share, there could be a good chance that it holds support if the buying pressure is heavy. So that's one thing that I'm actually going to be watching this week to see if DraftKings has a pullback. If it gaps up into tomorrow and like starts to push up in let's say 1950 a share, 20 a share, I'm not going to chase calls on that, even though like the risk is there for it, but I don't want to risk that kind of stuff with how I trade personally. I like to catch the pullbacks for the calls, and then I like to get puts when it pushes. My put position for DraftKings is going to be that triple top gap fill. I don't want to even think about puts until that happens, because if it does break out above that, I can trim the puts and not have to worry about it, and I can switch the calls if it pulls back down after the breakout of the triple top. I want to focus on the overall zones, and I want to watch the buying pressure when it comes into this kind of stuff. Let me pull up Apple. I know Apple people watch a lot. Yeah, you're welcome. If you guys have any questions, like, I don't want to just talk this whole time because I trade very different from a lot of people. I hate trading breakouts. I hate getting puts on the support breaks. I love doing the complete opposite because I feel like just hedge funds and everyone, they're doing that kind of stuff. They're making those wicks happen. So if you buy calls at the top, they're going to pull it back, hoping that the stop losses get hit. People get down 20, 30% on an option play, and they're going to sell for a loss before they push it right back up. I try and play conservative with my money. I don't want to just risk money and just hope that I make it. Hey, what's up, Coco? But yeah, so I haven't looked at Apple in a while. I haven't charted it. I haven't even traded in a while, honestly, with you, but let's see what we can pick up on this. Because Apple, I mean, everyone knows Apple can have a green day and SPY's going to be red. SPY could have a green day, Apple can be red. It's one of those stocks where it just does whatever it wants to do. So I'm just going to start on the 4 hours since the daily doesn't really have any trend lines I can find. So just looking right here, we have a lot of zones, a lot of wicks, a lot of consolidations. I mean, we broke above it a few times. We're actually currently in that spot. So let me put the actual line here, not just the highlight. So once again, just like previously what I've said, I don't find like an exact dead price per share point for a line. I just look for like the zone between this number and this number. I know right now Apple has had a lot of rejections, just anywhere between, it looks like 1 150.50 and 152 a share. So this is one of those things that you want to watch out for because currently Apple is in that area. It can push above for a few days and hold, consolidate, drop right back down. If the overall market stays, do you like the fine tune? So yeah, so he asked the question, do you like the 4 hour and the 2 hour most? Also, do you color code your levels? So when I first chart any stock, even if I know where it's at, I always start with the 4 hour, the 2 hour, the daily, sometimes even the weekly if I have to go farther back. The only reason I do this is because a lot of people, when they use, say, the 2 minute, the 5 minute, the 15 minute, the 30 minute, they can't see like this far back like I am on Apple right now. They can't see all this rejection. All they see is just this right here. So they're going to basically think, okay, we had a pullback. We had this falling trend. We held, we bounced, we broke the previous lower high right here. We're bullish. We're going to keep running. When you're looking at this, all you see is consolidation way up here. So you're thinking the gap fill is going to be like 155 a share, 154. That's why I zoom out, because when you zoom out, we've been in this zone before. We've had the same issue. We pulled back here. We pushed right back up and rejected. I mean, we've had the same scenario. That's why I use the larger frames. And then with the color coding, so I haven't been doing that when I've been charting just now, but I usually use yellow and orange for like the tops, which would be like rejections for puts. I use orange and yellow. And then for like the bottom support levels, I'll use red and I'm trying to get the other color I usually use. It's like the red and the blue, red and purple. So I try and use those so that like when those levels hit, I know like, okay, yellow means that we're at a resistance zone. I need to be thinking about puts, or I need to look at the chart and see what's actually happening. If I see the stock like drop and I'm on like the 15 minute and I see red, my first thought is we're at a heavy support. Like this could bounce right here. Because at that point, I don't have to zoom back out and see like, okay, why did I put this level here? So I'll use like red, blue, and purple for support. And then for my resistance, I'll use yellow, orange, and then the white ones, which in this like charting I've been doing, I've been using white for everything. I usually just put white for like undetermined areas. Like it's just like a zone. A zone's there, but it's not bullish or bearish. It's kind of just like in the middle. So if you want, I'll just do an example of how I actually chart these with the color coordination. So obviously I'll put a yellow around this area. And before we had this major drop off, I'm going to pull back a little bit. So look at this yellow right here. We had a rejection and pullback. When we finally broke above it here, we had a pullback that held support when it pulled back. So this zone, it doesn't have to be a pinpoint. I'm focused on the zone area. So this is like a between 150 a share and 152 a share. That zone is heavy. There's always going to be buying pressure or selling pressure depending on where the stock price is with that zone, whether it's above or below. Then I'm also going to put, I see a double bottom right here. If you're looking at just this frame individually from like this point to this point. So I'll put a line here and I'll leave this white because it's not, you can't really tell if it's like bullish or bearish. This is like currently where the price is. So when I come over here, now you can see that the current price is above where this white line is. And it kind of correlates with this right here where it hit after hours and pre-market. I'm hoping that answered your question. I'm not trying to like speed through this or anything, but I want to try and get as much done in this hour as I can. With Apple right now, yeah, you're welcome. With Apple right now, a lot of people, like I was saying earlier, they're on the smaller frames. They're focused on this is going to keep going. This could keep pushing. This could break out even more. Yeah, when I finish this one, I'll talk about that. So he just basically asked, can I speak on how the hedge funds create bullish and bearish moves? That's one thing that it's not like 100% guaranteed. It's more so a personal opinion. That's how I look at it because, I mean, the whole idea of trading is all personal opinion. It's not like a guarantee making money. Like, I'm going to buy calls here, it's going to go up. I'm going to get puts here, it's going to go down. You're looking at the market sentiment and just historical levels to give you an edge. That's all this is. You want to use historical levels to give you the edge. So when we're looking at Apple, this yellow line I have right here, it's rejected. It's not a dead on price point, but in this zone, it rejects. It's a resistance zone. When it did break out, let me change this color to highlight. When it broke out here, it had a massive candle in the 4 hour. I mean, massive. Basically a $10 move on a 4 hour candle. The very next day it pulled back, tried to push back up, and it failed. And then the day after that, it had a massive, I have not talked about BABA, but I will get to that right after this. I got you. And after it broke out, think about if you chase calls on this, like you waited for the breakout, you got calls, and then just like the very next day, if you swung calls, you're like, I mean, it's down $5 a share from the high on the previous day. That's not gonna like that's not smart. That's like I can't trade like that. I can't chase a call. If you bought it like midway through this 4 hour bullish candle, you're set, you're good, but just trim before the day's over. So when that breakout happened, it pulled right back inside. It broke that like the resistance yellow. That's resistance. Once it's above, that now is support since the price action is above. It broke straight through. I mean, the very next day, it basically lost everything it gained plus more going into the next 2 to 3 days after that. And then it finally formed this new support area on the bottom. And if you use this support area, it gives you a good idea that it's happened before. Like it's pulled back and held there. It's pulled back and held. I mean, even back here, it's pulled back to that same zone and held. You just want to find like overall zones. You don't want to focus on those small frames. So where Apple is right now, I don't want to get calls. That's just how I am. I don't want to get calls. I want to see if it can hold for a few days. Maybe if it just pushes straight green, it could have the same effect as it's had in the past. It has a huge candle. You're expecting continuation. It's going to fail the very next day. That's where I size extremely light. I size for 0, and I basically swing a put position because historically it rejects. You're going off historical data for your current positions. That's how you limit your risk. You don't want to just like, let me switch to the 15-minute. This is an extremely bullish bounce on Apple. Looking at it on the 15 or even the 30-minute, you're expecting this gap fill, which obviously it can happen. I'll make this orange. This gap fill can happen, but I don't want to chase calls after within the past 2 trading days, it's up almost $8 a share. Like I missed the move. Other people may not think they did, but from my perspective, my risk is so much higher now because the move already happened. I don't want to chance it right now. I mean, if it pushes up to the 155 a share, I'll start considering puts, but I'm not going to look at puts right now, even though it's zoning where this yellow line is, the 151.13 area. So it's looking. Uh, 139 a share. Is that correct what you meant to say? 139. So you need to pull back to there. I mean, if I'm looking at, you're obviously talking about calls for this. So if I'm looking for calls with how high the price is, I would just want to see it reject this yellow zone I have, which is the 151.13. Because if it rejects there and holds below for a few days and there's no buying pressure to keep it above, like obviously the 151.13 is a dead point, but just say 150 to 153 a share. If it can't break out above that in 2 to 3 days and the volume is dying down, there's a good chance that there could be selling pressure within all of that, and it's just holding because there's not enough buyers. So I would be looking at puts at that point only if it's held for a few days. You don't just want to buy puts because it's at a zone. You want to wait to see if it hits that like massive gap up or a massive candle with a wick, kind of like how it has in the 155 a share. And for calls, like I know you said the 139, that 143 area with this red is pretty heavy, but if it does break that, just like what you said, that next support is going to be around that 139, 140 a share price because there is tons of pressure there. Whether if the stock's below and pushes, it rejects. If the stock's above that level and drops, there's buying pressure to bring it right back up. So there's a few zones you can watch, but like for me, right now is not the time that I want to even think about Apple. Maybe I'll send an alert that's around 154 a share. So if it does push and I'm not watching it, I get an alert saying like Apple's going up, so I can switch over to it and see if there's any selling pressure if it hits that orange rejection that I have. Hopefully that answered a few questions, and hopefully I'm not just talking too much. I'm gonna switch over to Baba now. Okay, so I'm actually swinging puts in Baba that I entered on Friday, and I'll get into that reasoning after I put a few charts and lines and zones on this. So first of all, for anyone that has not looked at a Baba chart before, the majority moves that this has is a gap up or down overnight. It rarely ever has an actual move during the day, and that's one reason why it's very risky to trade Baba. But this is one of the stocks I have on my list because I watch this every single day. Same with Moderna. I watch Moderna every day, and that's a stock many people don't want to look at. So when I'm looking at the 4 hour, Let me start on the daily actually. So obviously we're at a heavy support, and you're probably thinking, well, you just said you don't buy puts at support, you want to buy at the top. When I'm looking at the overall sentiment for Baba, I know China had some results on, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, with like manufacturing companies had like positive results for their production, and Baba did not move at all. When Baba had their earnings this past week, it didn't have any push or drop after their earning release, and their earnings were good. So I was very skeptical with the data first over the chart setup. So that's why I was slowly watching to see if I could catch like a push to enter in some puts. So just looking at this on the daily, we're holding this support trend zone, and say it does push, we're looking at a rejection around the $94 a share, 94.50. And that's only because there's about 4 days right here that it wicked or tapped out. And then historically, if you're looking, there's a few times it's like wicked above, but it's failed and came right back down within. And obviously it's had its push-ups, but a lot of this stuff like back here, you can't really do much with charting here. I mean, it's just like gap ups overnight, pullbacks during the day. You can't really correlate any of this with current market sentiment. So I will look at it, but I'll try and avoid looking at these like massive gap ups on the daily, and I'll switch to the 4 hour now. Looking at the 4 hour, I like for my pattern setups, I see a invert cup and handle right here. I mean, we're currently forming that handle, and we already had the cup form, the push up and reject. So right now, like for me, I don't want to say it's like a hopeful play, but I'm very bearish on just China companies with what's been going on recently. I mean, they had their estimates for manufacturing, and not many Chinese companies had like a massive push. I mean, that's when Baba had this happen. This was on the Wednesday. It had that gap up, and it just pulled right back down after that release of like, oh, the manufacturing companies in China are having like a good estimate for the year. It didn't have any momentum. There's no buying pressure. It is holding well at the support, which is like the $88 a share. So like personally, and I'll speak on this because emotions are huge for a lot of people, like to not speak on, this could gap up into tomorrow. And if it does, I won't be upset because I size so light, I can add more to my position to lower my average. I literally size 2 contracts for about 85 a piece. So I'm in about 170 bucks total. My original full position I wanted was about 15 contracts. So if it does have a push, I can add more to what I already have. So I'm focused on this mostly because the selling pressure to me is looking very heavy compared to the buying pressure. When it tried to push after those results on Wednesday, it basically just had nothing going for it. There was no energy, there was no buying pressure, there was no like, oh, let's gap up. Like there was no other China companies that had that push. And the US stock market boomed Thursday and Friday. So I know a lot of people, they look at the Chinese index and the S&P for correlation. Like when China's up, S&P is going to follow. SPY's been up, and the China companies have just been sitting. It's like they're waiting for the drop off, or they're going to take off like with the volume coming out of nowhere. So I'm more so looking at the downside for this, because if it does break, which obviously it's hopeful, but from my experience trading Baba, if it breaks this support with all this pressure it has, it's going to fill a gap possibly down to 85 a share, maybe even have a pullback to 75 to 80. Can you speak on that one? Yeah, so okay, and I'm going to say this a lot because I'm very like, this is just me as a trader. Me personally, I know my emotions. I know how I am. I know my risk with my total position size and what I'm willing to risk and not just like waste. So when Baba pushes, I want to add more to my position around this 94 to 95 share. That's where I want to add for my puts, only because going off historically just with this inverted cup and handle, we have massive rejections in that zone. I was hoping to catch that Thursday and Friday, but it never had a push when it consolidated at the support. So that's why I sized light just in case the drop off does happen. One thing that I do, if we're at say support and it's just holding there, I will size extremely light to the point where if I lose that entire position, I can smile. I'm not upset. I'm not depressed. I don't care, because the money I put in, I'm willing to lose. But if the support does break, that 170 bucks I can sell for probably $200 profit. It's going to be an easy 100% gain, because if the support breaks, it's going to have just a straight downfall. There's not going to be a lot of buying pressure, because every time it's dropped below, it's had buyers around 85 a share, 86. That $4 drop is enough for me to sell my position. And even 2 contracts, that's enough for me. And if we push up, I can size how much I originally wanted, which was 10 to 15 contracts, but I didn't size that at the support bottom, because why would you size your main position when you know, okay, if this does bounce, I'm going to be down 50%. I can't hold that long. So I'll break this down as quick as I can and as simple as I can. If I size $1,000 right now at this area and it pushes and I'm down 50%, I'm down $500. Say that's my sell loss. I'm willing to lose $500 on $1,000 position. So why not just size $250, or like for my sake, $170? And if it goes to zero, I just save myself what, $340 if I would have sized $1,000 and sold at 50% loss. I try and use percentages and just risk reward before I enter trades. Like if I size 1,000 and my risk is $500, I'll just size 150 to $200, and if it goes to zero, I'm happy. Like that's fine for me. But if I am right and it doesn't have a push to where I want to add and it just totally drops through, I'll make 100% gains on $170. Like that's a solid risk reward because I'm saving money instead of sizing heavy. That's just how I trade basically. I'll size light and then I'll add at the like actual spot I wanted to have my regular position. It's a little bit impatient. You can say like, well, why do you want to size 2 contracts if you're not even sure it's going to break? You never know with stocks like this. I've watched Baba when you're swinging puts calls. So when I'm looking at Baba, I'm focused on like the overall move, the drop off. And this person just said, when you're swinging puts or calls, how far out are you looking to buy your contract? So before looking out like with the contract price and like the time you want to add to it, you want to figure out what your personal risk to reward is. Like, can you risk $150 a contract? Because with Baba, if you play 3 to 4 weeks out, those contracts are going to be about $250 or $5 out of the money. You want to focus on your personal account size, your personal emotions when you size. If you can afford to lose $200, you can size one contract 4 weeks out and you have more time for this trade to marinate. For me, I figured if this breaks, it's going to be within the week. Obviously, it can hold and push. So that's why I played a shorter time frame, which is I have this Friday expiration. I sized in Thursday and Friday, one contract basically each day. And if it does happen on the downside, that push down is going to like put my contract up roughly 50 to 100%. If you play 4 to 5 weeks out, you're going to pay more. And a $4 drop with 4-week time frame, you'll probably get a 25 to 30% gain on that contract, if maybe a little bit more, but it all just depends on how fast it happens, the intrinsic value. It all just depends. So like with DraftKings, for example, if you play a month out, those contracts are cheap. You can size that kind of stuff and actually hold. But with a stock like Tesla, Amazon, Apple, if you play a month out, they're going to be pricey. Netflix, a month out, pricey. Baba, it's pretty pricey. So you want to figure out like for your account size, okay, if I go 2 weeks out, if I go 3 weeks out, can I afford to get a contract that's at the money or 5 slots out of the money? You just want to look at the overall, like the Greeks, the volume on the contract you're looking at, and obviously the chart position, like where is the stock at on the chart? And if the move does happen, what's the chances of like the gap where I want to fill? Usually when I play, I never play 0 DTE unless like I size for 0. Like if I play SPX or SPY, I literally size like I'm going to lose everything. That way, if I do, or I sell for 80% loss or whatever, I'm not upset at all. Like I'm just relaxing. I'm content. I'm happy. If I'm playing stocks like Baba, Amazon, DraftKings, I'll look into the farther out expirations only because you can size heavier money wise, but you'll buy less contracts. So you're like, you don't have as much you have to worry about. The farther out you have time, you're not going to make as much of a percent gain, but obviously you're going to pay a lot more for that contract. Hopefully I didn't go over that question at all. Hopefully that was okay. Is there anything specific someone wants me to chart or look at? We have about 10 more minutes left. Or anything you want me to talk about? I know the hedge fund thing someone asked. Let me go back up and read that question. Yeah, QQQ, I got you. Let me go over the hedge fund thing real quick. So can you speak on how the hedge funds create bullish and bearish moves? So it's like I was saying earlier, it's not really like I know this is going to happen or someone knows like, oh, the hedge funds are trapping you, it's going to reject. You're basically focused on the chart layout and just the support, the resistance, the zones, the patterns, the trends. So I'll use that question you have while charting QQQ and just give you like how I think through when I chart stuff and look for moves. Okay. So I'm going to start on the daily actually because I can't see much back here. Okay. So obviously on the daily, we had this triple top rejection pullback. We just broke above that on Friday with the heavy volume we had. So I know at this point, I'm basically focused on this main zone right here. This is like the biggest part that's happened since we did have a hold here. We would have had a nice trend hold if it would have broke through, but since that support was so heavy for this, let's do red highlight. It held here and pushed right back up. When it contested again in this area, it held for a while, but it did break on the downside. And when it did break, like chop, 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 heavy push, tap out, tap out, tap out, basically a triple top right here. So that zone is heavy based on just what I've seen in the past. You can also use that for right here as well. Basically a double top or a triple top before it finally broke above, pulled back and held support, and then took off on the upside. So with QQ, I like to be blunt. I like to be honest. I have not traded QQ very often. I barely chart it, but just off what I see and my personal thoughts on this, if it pulls back to this zone anywhere between, I'd say 293 to 295 a share, it looks like a very heavy support, but you don't want to just like, oh, I'm going to size super heavy because this is a major support. I'm just going to like buy into it. You want to be very cautious and realize we just had a massive back-to-back green day. It's the same situation as SPY with Powell. He may move the market, he may not. The data he says could just keep us stagnant until CPI later this month. So we're not too sure what could happen. If you're focused on other levels, after the breakout from this day right here, we had a nice pullback to a support, which was also the previous rejection on the resistance right here. So that is another level that could also be played out. And also, let me go to the 1 hour. I just want to see this zone that we're at right here. So we also had rejection here. And let me make all these colors the same so you guys can see them a bit better. I'm using this as even though it's currently support, it was resistance before the breakout on Friday. So we have this yellow representing the resistance, which currently with price action, that is support, but I'm going off historical only right now. So we're looking at this. It held here for resistance or for support, acted here as resistance, resistance. Now it's back above. If it can pull back to that 298, 299 area, it could hold this support and push back up. The only issue that I would have is the gap is only about a $4 push to this next zone that I think would be around where this orange is. It's roughly about $302 a share on QQQ. So it's kind of like, for me, once again, if I'm looking at this, I don't want to chase calls where it's just sitting at the 300 a share, 301. I'd want to wait for some price action to form. Yeah, I mean, I'm very big on like just speaking the truth. I hate saying like, oh, this is going to happen, or I truly think this will happen. I'm just blunt with it because at the end of the day, we're all risking money. We're all throwing money in, hopeful to make money back. You don't just want to throw money in just like, oh, I hope this keeps going. You want risk to be as small as possible where your reward is going to be like heavy, 1-to-5 ratio, 1-to-4 ratio. And right now with the Q, if it pushes a 302, 303 and it has like heavy stagnant, there's not a lot of buying pressure, you can look into, for me, I look into puts because I'm looking at the pullback. Going off of this zone, it held above, pulled back, had a lot of wick downs here, but it pulled back above. But when it finally broke, there was no recontest of that zone. Like it just tanked right down. So who's to say that it could push back up to this now resistance and just reject heavy and come right back down to 298 a share? I mean, there's a lot going on right here. If you're on the smaller frames, like I said earlier, oh my gosh, like it broke out of this heavy consolidation right here. Like QQ is going to keep running. You have to look at the larger frames to know like what's the overall sentiment on this current move. Like where is it sitting price action wise to give me a better risk reward? And right now it's in this 302 to 298 area. It's just right in the middle. A lot of consolidation has happened here. I mean, even going back a little bit, was this pre-market? There's probably data release that made this wick happen. But I mean, even back here, we had a double top at 294 area. We're in a zone. And I know a lot of people like to play this kind of stuff, but for me personally, I'd want to wait for either a rejection for puts or for a heavy support with buying pressure for me to get calls, because that 298 is looking really good if it can pull back. There's a big chance that that could be the support that holds if the market overall stays strong. That's just how I personally feel. If that 298 breaks, we're going to be focused on that 294, since it did hold right here before the breakout. And then obviously a lot of chop for about a week and a half straight, just up, down, up, down. Yeah, so the biggest thing, I mean, honestly, the only thing that Hassan taught me that I use the most is probably the tape. I use tape just to determine the larger orders. I also use tape on option flow, like the option contracts, which I am gonna show you guys what I do when we get to like the course section of all of this. But being his mentee with tape was one of the biggest things that helped me determine the price action. Because when you integrate that with the actual charts, the support, the resistance, I don't want to say you're unstoppable, but there is a heavy chance that you're going to make your risk so minimal that a year or two from now, if you size properly every trade, you can't lose. There's literally no way you can lose more money if you size properly and you wait for the best entries. That's why I always preach longevity, size light, size for zero, because when you follow the same technique every trade and you don't FOMO in, you don't oversize because you think you had like 5 back-to-back green trades, oh, I'm going to keep getting green. That one trade of oversizing, you're backtracked 10 days of green. Like you're back to where you started. It's all a mental game. Tape has been one of the best things that I took hours to learn. I mean, I would stay up hours after market close. I would record the market and rewatch the tape just so I could see like what orders went through the flashers on the order book. I would look for everything. The time in sales with the orders actually filled. So I don't use Dash Trader. I've dabbled with it, but I also have used the Webull NBBO. I don't know if you've heard of that. Webull has NBBO, which shows you the basically the same stuff as the DAS, but it doesn't categorize it from like the blue. What are the colors of them? The blue, red, green, orange. Webull only has 4 different ones. It shows the filled above the ask, filled at the ask, the mid, and then the bid price and filled below the bid. But I mean, yeah. Does anyone have any other questions? We're coming down to the last 3 minutes or so. I hope I did good for my first time for the people that are here. Love you too, bro. Appreciate you, man. But yeah, I hope I didn't throw you guys off with the way I trade. MDRN, yeah, I got you. Oh, shoot, I'm tripping. Kevin, you said MDRN. Did I read that wrong? Do you mean Moderna? Yeah. You know, you're good, man. I just want to make sure. But yeah, so Moderna is another one that I'm heavy on. And if you guys have noticed, I do talk about this a lot in the chat, and I got 2 minutes, so I'll make this as quick as possible. So right now we hit a heavy downtrend. Like, I mean, we broke the trend. We're on the downside. The overall support is like this zone right here, basically, which this is where I want to get calls, is around the 118 to 123, basically. So I want to see it keep coming down for calls first. But with how strong it's been these past few days, we've held well currently. The only issue is I want to see a pullback for calls to where it couldn't break the past 3 days before the breakout, which is around that 140 a share. You don't just want to buy if it wicks. I personally like to wait to see if it holds for a few days and buying pressure steps in. But then again, you have a heavy reject for the resistance around that 148. I can't get too deep into this, but we can always go over this next Sunday with what it does in the market Monday through Friday. Moderna, I also watch every day. This is one that I like to do. Currently, it's in the zone. I would not touch it until it has a massive move upside or downside to show more movement. That's just me, though. Yeah, no problem, man. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, because I know this is stuff that I love to do. I love helping people. So any questions you guys have, we have the lessons and discussion in the academy section. So anything you want to ask in there, I will respond to you. I can even post a chart for a response. So just let me know anything you need and I'll respond as quick as possible. Yeah, I recommend learning the tape. Just realize it's going to take a few weeks, if not a few months. It takes a long time, but it's definitely worth it. But yeah, so we're basically up with the hour. I appreciate every one of you. Once again, any questions, just post it in the lessons and discussion tab, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Hope you guys have a good night and everything. Appreciate all of you.